All right, I think maybe we can start, right? Thank you very much for coming. This is the panel discussion on the diaspora engagement when it comes to climate change disaster. So hope you're in the right room. Thank you for our panelists to be here. Over there we have Manuel, who is a climate expert for IOM. Maybe you can present yourself on the microphone.
Thank you so much. Good morning, all. It's a pleasure being here. My name is Manuel Pereira. I'm the Chief of Climate Policy Advocacy at IOM. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Good morning.
Good morning. Adriana, you're here from Peru, and you're the representative of a diaspora-led organization in Peru. Can you give a bit more about yourself?
Of course, first of all, thanks to DEMAC to invite me to be here, and to all of you. I am Adriana Delgado. I came from Peru, from a diaspora organization called Help Peru. I am an anthropologist working more than 20 years in development and sustainable programs.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Manyang Mayen. I'm a citizen of South Sudan. I work for an organization called the Sud Institute. It's a think tank organization in South Sudan. It's a policy-based organization. We try to influence the decision of the government with objective facts of science. I consult some time independently, and I was hired by Nuria Global to conduct a study on climate change and how the South Sudanese diasporians respond to the disasters that are happening in South Sudan. That work was sponsored by DEMAC, and that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
Hi, DEMAC and IOM. I am Miraline Zegnoun, and I am the research and meal specialist for DEMAC. I'm going to give you a small presentation of who we are shortly, and I'll be moderating the panel discussion today. And I will also present you first some of the key findings of the research we conducted with IOM. And then next to me, we have Adrien.
Hello, everybody. I'm Adrian Burry. I'm the senior coordinator for DEMAC, and I'll be monitoring the questions online and supporting with tech if there is any need. But it looks like it's working fine as well online. So thank you.
So maybe I will start with a little bit about today's session. First, I'm going to present the research that we conducted together with IOM on the diaspora's engagement on climate disaster. I'll try to not be too long so that then we can move on to the panel discussion where Adriana and Daniel will talk about the diaspora's engagement in their country. And then Manuel will also tell us about his experience involving diaspora and civil society organizations in disaster response when it comes to climate change. Then we'll have time for Q&A, and we count on, we hope that you have questions and that you can think of how diaspora is involved in your own countries when it comes to climate change. Maybe we'll also have some questions online, and and then it's going to be time for lunch. So maybe right before I talk about the research objectives, I can talk a little bit about DEMAC and IOM. So DEMAC is the Diaspora Emergency Action and Coordination Initiative of the Danish Refugee Council. And our mission is to look into how diaspora involved in humanitarian actions and promote their role as humanitarian actors, as well as support capacity development for those who would like to have it, and coordinate or support their coordination within diaspora coordination organizations in country following specific crisis. We work together with IOM and the Diaspora Engagement Unit into how we can better have them included in the humanitarian ecosystem in a better way. And we have commissioned this research together on the response to climate change specifically, so with a thematic access on climate. So the main objectives of the research were to look at what type of engagement does diaspora have when it comes to climate change? How do they respond? How do they organize their response? How do they get the funds and things like this? How do they select their beneficiaries? At what stages of climate response are they the most involved? And how they interact together with other humanitarian actors, such as INGOs, governments, local communities, and local community and local organizations. The method used for the research was mostly qualitative. It was interviews with the different actors involved. So of course, we had the Diasporas representatives. We also had local actors, the affected communities, governments, and international NGOs. There were also some observations of some of the programs that Diasporas made in their countries, and of course, like literature review, but maybe I can move on. The research is a case study of in five countries. So we have Peru, the southern regions of Peru. We have South Sudan, and it was in the Bor region. We also have Tuvalu, Egypt, and Sri Lanka. And the reason we chose those countries was because of their vulnerability or extreme vulnerability to climate change risks, and also because they were countries that we were interested in looking at, as we did not, at least at DEMAC and IOM, looked very closely at these specific countries. Today, we are going to talk about Peru and South Sudan mostly because this is the panel we have with us. But I'm sure that Manuel can also give you some context about some of the other countries if you are interested in them. So when it comes to the key findings, the main finding that we had was that diaspora organizations are very quick in response. They tend to react very quickly when a new crisis emerges. They manage to get funds very rapidly, and they are coming in very strong from the get-go. But that was especially in the context of emergency relief and also sometimes early recovery. Yeah. The second finding is that when it comes to longer term adaptation, we had examples of diasporas who were also involved in that, but it was in a lesser extent. And again, they were really less involved when it comes to early warning and mitigation activities, but it did depend on the context. And I think that today we have contexts where that are quite different. So we hope that we can show that today. The other main key findings is that social media was a very important platform for the operations of diaspora-led organizations. This is where they receive the requests from the local communities when it comes to preparation, but also when it comes to the needs following a catastrophe. This is the way they connect with their local partners, that are sometimes local CSOs, but can also be family and community elder, which allows them to be so quick. This is also where they raise funds and raise appeals to get money very quickly. And we believe that this is why they are so agile, is because this is where they just go on social media and they receive a lot of support there. We also saw that they are extremely good at reaching areas that are often very hard to access for international NGOs, especially when these are affected regions that are not usually accessed by INGOs, which, climate crises happen in places that sometimes are not affected by other humanitarian crises where maybe INGOs already have operations. And we believe that this is one of the main strengths of diaspora, and where intention from INGOs should focus as well. Not everything is perfect. I think that depending on the countries we looked at, there were also different ways for them to select their beneficiaries, and in some countries it was very much based on assessments of needs and so on. But there are also some countries where one of the aspects that was also thought of is clan or clanism, and I think we are going to be talking about it today for the example of South Sudan. And so, yeah, this is also something that we need to put attention on when engaging with diaspora organizations, but also be aware of it and have probably realistic views also on what it means and so on. we also saw that the motivation of diaspora to work on climate change related disaster is mostly to relieve their communities or their families and so on, and not necessarily a specific focus they have. Like climate is not always a focus of their actions, but more a symptom that they are trying to heal. And so we're going to be talking about it, I think, in Peru. I don't want to say too much now, but yeah, like this is maybe something to think of. For now, it's more reactive than something that is a main focus of the diaspora-led organizations we looked into. I'm a bit hesitating in giving you the recommendations we have on this research, just because I think that I would also like this panel discussion to raise some recommendations. And I feel like I'm mashing up the work a little bit, but I'm going to give you some, and then you can think of other recommendations you think would be very useful when involving diaspora organizations. These ones are targeting INGOs, UN agencies, and governments. And we believe that they should solicit the expertise of diaspora organizations when it comes to access, but also when it comes to the way they should plan activities in some specific areas, because they are very well connected to local partners and they are very linked to the communities they are supporting. Through family link, to friendship links. These are very strong links, and I think that they should be considered as experts when it comes to access. They also need to receive some assistance when it comes to the technical aspects of climate change. It is quite a technical topic, and when programming or planning programs on climate, maybe this is something that they could beneficiate from other humanitarian actors who are involving or who are more and more moving towards responses related to climate. And also provide capacity building when it comes to the effectiveness of their fundraising, because they are very effective at fundraising with the diaspora, but it is also very important for the health of their organizations to have a wider source of incomes. Yeah, we can talk about this one. There's also things that need to be considered for INGOs and UN agencies and government when they get involved with diaspora organizations. It's to not constrain. I think one of the main important thing for diaspora organizations is how flexible and rapid they are in their response. And when engaging with them, we should be careful not to refrain them or to refrain this. And that means adapting the way you engage or partner with this type of actors. That comes to the second point, actually, the introduction of overly bureaucratic requirements, and but also making sure that you are considering the effect of diaspora support on community dynamics in countries where this is already a bit of an issue. And again, it really depends on the context and the countries, and we're going to see it today. I think for the diaspora, what we thought of was most related to the clanism in some countries and the dynamics that their help has and the beneficiary selection. We also believe that because they are a very trusted source of information, there are very many studies that show that diaspora are very trusted. Of course, it always depends on the context, but most of the time they are very trusted sources of information, so they could be leveraged when it comes to preparedness or even early warning. We also recommend that they build stronger relationship with INGOs if INGOs are also open to this. And that they also engage with the private sector, especially when it's diaspora-led private sector and climate investment. I think it's enough for the research, and now we can just move on to the discussion. So thank you very much for being here. I know that it hasn't been very easy for some of you, especially you in South Sudan with the visa requirements. So we are very, very happy you're here with us and not online. Maybe we were talking about climate change, so I'm going to ask maybe Manuel first if you could give us some information on what type of climate hazards are happening maybe in Peru and in Sudan that put them especially at risk?
Thank you. I will add. I want to add one thing before that, because I think it's important and is part of the advocacy. When we look at climate conversations, of course, everyone knows the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. What we have not done enough, and this is to arrive to that point, is link the other conventions, right? This is not a convention. This is a family of conventions. We have the Desertification Convention and the Biodiversity Convention. This will not work if we do not have the similar investment on the three conventions, because despite climate impacting all countries in the world, it's the biodiversity and the ecosystems of those countries that will shape the problems that you will have. It will shape the solutions. And on top of that, in terms of desertification that is centered, and many people think it's about vegetation, but it's about the productive systems of the earth which sustain human communities. That collapse and the absence of intervention on that, added to the climate change, added to the lack of biodiversity, threatens communities all over. So, and I made this point because I think Peru is a paradigm of these, right? If and IOM did a research on these issues in Peru in 2021 that I recommend that you look at. And there's a very interesting graphic. If you make a cut across Peru, you will see there's a coastal area, a mountainous area, and a rainforest area. These three ecosystems are connected, but they present very different challenges to the communities that live in them. And Peru is a paradigm because it has the bulk of all the dangers that many countries in the world will have, all in one and all impacting a community. We have sea level rise in the coast, we have acidification of waters, we have the decrease of the production of the fishing industry and other sources of life. We have significant erosion because of the type of geology of the coastal areas of Peru. Then we go to the mountains and we start looking at issues of drought, changes in temperatures, the melting of the ice caps, again, erosion, floods. And then we move to the Amazon, where it becomes even more complicated because there is floods, but there is also drought. And we have seen most recently in the Amazon, and especially on Brazil, the dry out of the Amazon river for a long period, and now the south of Brazil has massive floods. This variability is what will create a dimension of problems on top of each other, complementing each other, aggravating each other. That's going to be very difficult in a country with multiple ecosystems and the geography that, despite beautiful, is also very challenging for communities and governments to respond. And in the Amazon, just a point to say that the collapse of the ecosystem and the death of parts of the Amazon on different reasons, it doesn't confine to Peru, right? And I will jump to South Sudan. Some of the largest forested areas in the world, with forest or prairies, let's say, are part of what's keeping the climate intact and the climate functioning. When those ecosystems dies, the capacity to absorb carbon and sustain life dies with that. And that triggers global challenges. I think the best example on parallel that I can do is the El Nino and La Nina, that again, in South Sudan and in Peru, in two different locations of the world, have differentiated impacts, but it's the same phenomena that challenges communities. We are seeing now in Kenya, in Mozambique, in other parts of Africa that had been under drought for a very long period, extreme flooding, and more recurrent and more precipitation, more concentrated. The soil cannot cope, the ecosystem cannot cope. The same in relation to Peru. So I think the main point that I wanted to make on the risks is we live in a more dangerous world with more interconnected risks, and we are doing very little to be ready to face that or to decrease that. I would welcome everyone to read today's article on The Guardian. The Guardian has reached out to 50%, well, to all, but almost 50% of the experts of the IPCC reports replied. And these 50% of the most eminent scientists on the planet say that we are going to a minimum of 2.5 degrees. The next IPCC report, it's being discussed now, the index, because the last one was 2 years ago. We can not wait 7 years to digest what science is already telling us. And so I think that South Sudan also in particular, because it's a very important water basin, and it will be continued to be challenged with prolonged flooding, standing water, the health risks that comes to this, the excessive water to plants that are not used to it will kill the vegetation. So even more problems related with that then can be combined with severe periods of drought. I talk too much about this. I'm going to shut up now. Sorry, this could be like 17 hours, but my point continues to be, it should not be about the risks or a specific risk. It should be about the functionality of the ecosystems, the capacity of the land systems to sustain us and all life, and of course the biodiversity that allows this. Peru is extremely important to the world because the potatoes and the corn and the tomatoes that we eat, that are all part of these hybrids that we created, have their ancestral home in Peru. Diseases that grow with climate change need the genes of the original seeds untouched for us to survive. And this is part of the issue. And South Sudan has one of the largest conservation areas in the world because unfortunately, due to the war, wildlife went there. So now the ecosystem is a little bit back, more pristine. So we need that ecosystem. And that's, I'll end here. Sorry, I really talked too much about these things.
Thank you, Manuel. Well, it's good. You're very also you love what you do, and that's important. Maybe we can move on to Daniel. You are the one who made the research in South Sudan. Can you tell us about how does the diaspora respond to climate disasters in your country?
Thanks, Marilyn. I would like to give you a little bit background on the Republic of South Sudan, so that when I say some things later, they'll make sense to you. South Sudan used to be a part of Sudan, but due to protracted wars stemming from 1955 to 1972 to 83 until 2005, massive number of Southern Sudanese have been uprooted, have to go abroad. The vast majority of these people are in Western world, particularly in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, and here in Europe. Now, these people who have been uprooted were not equally distributed across the country. They came from certain areas. And so the vast majority of the people are Dinka people and the Nuer people. And so most of them are here in the West. And what they do with their economic power is to remit money back to South Sudan. This money is then transferred to local organizations that are interconnected with the main organization in the West. And some of these remittances are used to build or repair levees or dikes that are built to defend the villages from flooding from the Nile. Secondly, some of the money is used in terms of emergency when flood comes, like they did in 2020. The local organization contacted the DO's diaspora organization from the West, and the money was quickly shifted, was remitted to South Sudan, and boats were hired to go deep into the villages where international NGOs have no access due to insecurity and lack of infrastructure. They were able to do that and rescue the people, brought them to Boer Town, which is at the time was the high ground. And then they were able to buy basic necessities like foods and shelter and clothes for them. But then the local organization engaged the international NGOs like the LWF, the UNHCR, the POW that are functioning there doing humanitarian works to take over because the help was a little bit limited in the scope. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Maybe Adriana, how does your diaspora organization response to climate change disasters in Peru?
Well, first, let me tell you who we are.
Yeah.
Help Peru is an organization created, funded in 2013 by Peruvian professionals living in New York and mainly working in finance and banking sector. They wanted to give back to their country, so they create this foundation at the beginning, volunteering in a volunteering way, but with clear focus, which is working through local Peruvian NGOs, creating partnerships, and of course having three approaches or priorities: education, health, and environment. But for us, these are entry points because we have an approach of an holistic and integral approach. So we started with these, for example, education programs or health programs or environmental programs, and then with long-range plans, we include different aspects and issues that the community needs, including some climate change responses or emergencies. Talking about climate change, we work through two Peruvian NGOs, experts in climate change, and we do mitigation and adaptation projects. For example, in adaptation, I can mention a program we have in the Amazon region in which we promote sustainable livelihoods projects, build capacities for the communities, mainly young people and families, to develop productive but sustainable productive activities. And in mitigation, for example, we work in the Amazon region, in the Andes region too, for create, and this is very, very interesting program, participatory mapping and participatory planning of conservation areas. There are two kinds of areas in these regions: private conservation areas and community communal conservation areas. So this is a really participatory work we are promoting in the Amazon and the Andes, and mainly focusing degraded areas and reparating, I don't know if it's the name, but with through reforestation with native species.
I have to remember the microphone. Daniel, do you have also examples maybe of mitigation projects that you saw in South Sudan?
Yes.
Or was it adaptation?
Yeah, when I interviewed the locals, some of the money that is remitted from the Western world is used to plant trees, because what has happened from 2020 to 2022, the trees have naturally died. And so when the water receded, the area became barren. And so with the wind sweeping across, sweeping out the topsoil, and when rain comes, it erodes the other one. So tree planting is one of their adaptation. The other one, to cope with life, the Diaspora organization have encouraged the local to change method of farming. Rice has not been historically been a form of crops cultivated in South Sudan, in particular in the Bor area, but now it has been initiated by an organization in Minnesota called the Twee's Community Association. They just harvested in September their first rice production, and it's going to be encouraged across the country, because sorghum cannot grow in water, and so rice has to be substituted for it. Thank you.
I see you are nodding. Like, do you have anything to add to this?
I think that is part of this cooperation and solidarity worldwide, right? Climate change will force many people around the world to change who they are and how they live, right? And there has to be empathy to help share the solutions that other communities may have and work, right? Flood-resistant rice is something that is used in many countries already that produce rice to allow farmers to be better off, right? But we also need to see that when you change a basic staple on someone's diet, it has interferences on culture, on dietary requirements, on health, on other things. And so it needs more than just an exchange of technologies. And I think the diaspora has the capacity and the trust among communities to be the vehicle of trust, because it has the capacity to open people to listen to a solution that is foreign to them. And we see a lot of this in adaptation. If we do not invest on that, adaptation will become maladaptation, because then it's a foreign concept, a foreign tool. We need to facilitate this knowledge absorption. And this is not just for climate change, it's for anything, right? I'm from the time, not to that I'm that old, but I'm from the time that the phone had a string attached to it. I now grab one of these and sometimes I just want to throw it away, right? And so technology is something that needs a two-way process, and I think for adaptation with many communities and at countries at risk, that is very important at all levels. The basic technology on the type of crops and improvements on shelters, but also on technology and access to early warning systems and other more complex things. And I'll shut up now.
Nice, thank you. Adriana, you talked a lot about the projects you had in awareness, also on mitigation, but you also do emergency relief.
We are not a humanitarian organization, but of course, if something happened in Peru, like for example, the pandemic or El Nino related disasters such as floods or landslides, we are ready to respond quickly. No, and we support, for example, with a basic sanitary package and food in these situations. And in fact, I'm probably talk later about this, but we need to connect with humanitarian organization because we are in the most difficult accessible areas. No, so we are there also to help.
Understood. So actually, maybe now I want to move on. So you described some of the responses you have seen in South Sudan and in Peru, but I would like now to talk about maybe where you see yourself as being strong responders when it comes to climate. And maybe I could also ask you, Daniel, so you're not a diaspora representative, but you have studied or researched this aspect in South Sudan. What, in your opinion, did the diaspora do well in South Sudan when it came to response to climate?
Okay, once again, thank you. I am connected in a way to the diaspora and South Sudanese diaspora population because I have several relatives who are in Australia, in Sweden, in US, in Canada. So I benefit from these remittances. My family and I do. We get help. I have cousins and nephews and nieces that usually send money every month. So one of the main strengths is their ability to quickly raise money through social media platform like Facebook, WhatsApp, or GoFundMe. They do that quickly and they remit the money to the local organization in Bor or in Juba, and then the money is quickly transferred to the site so that the victim of the flood or the victim of whatever it is that's a natural disaster that has affected them could be addressed quickly. Their other ability is that they are deeply involved in social development and things like building schools for the children that are not able to attend government school in remote areas. They do that freely by getting together, like this month on the 25th and the 26th in the state of Minnesota. The Bor County Development Association is holding a fundraising. There is no emergency yet, but they are raising money because they know something is going to come in the future. This is one of their strengths. The other one, they build maternity wards. They send money because child mortality rate is very high in South Sudan, and women die during childbirth because of the remoteness of the health facilities that the government do provide, or UN. UN tend to function in big cities, but in the rural areas, in the village, there are no hospitals, there are no clinics. So you can imagine when a mother is having a hard time giving birth, and so they die sometime. And so what these organizations are doing, and my community of Abordit in Bor County, we're currently building a clinic In the community, I'm a Secretary General of our organization, and I oversee the reports between both the locals and our people in diaspora. And they send money, and we go and build the clinics. And then we initiate the UN agencies to bring the medicine and the people to come and work there. Thanks.
And on climate specifically?
And on climate, they also, in a limited way, because they seem not to understand what is happening. They know how to respond. This is what they know how to do. But they are involved in sending money and telling the local organization to teach people about the impact of climate change, because climate change is something that is here to stay. And so, for instance, the awareness that they are working on could be like in June and July, we are going to have that effect that Mr. Manuel was talking about. The El Nino is affecting Kenya already, and we're going to get our chair very soon. And so we are telling our people to move away from the riverbanks, to be far away and move to highlands and the high grounds, and then to use sea resistant to flood. This is one of the other things that they do that I didn't mention earlier. Yes.
Thank you. I think you talked about the local, or how connected they are to local organization. Can you maybe just explain how the Diaspora in Minnesota sends money and remittances to those specific local organizations? Can you explain how that works, like this network?
Yeah, so basically the local organization, so so the main body is called Board Community Development Association. And so we have a mini version of it in Board, and it's responsible by coordinating the efforts. And so me as a Secretary General of my community, so I'll know what are the needs of my community, and I want to communicate that to them, and they'll respond by sending money. We have our finance director, the money goes to him, and then it comes with directions. Usually how they transmit them, remit them, is through international bank like Dabshil, Amal Express, or Western Union, sometimes through mobile money transfer companies like M-Pesa, or this new cash app, that they use nowadays. If they have access in South Sudan, they do. Thanks.
I see. And because what I wanted to say is that you have this board community that has a diaspora representative. Then you also have like in the county representatives. And you told me once that they also had representatives in IDP camps, for example, right? Because there are some people of the board community in Uganda. What type of access do they have to those IDP, and how do they support them?
So basically, in northern Uganda and central Uganda, due to the recent war that erupted in 2013 and 2016, Southern Sudanese have been expelled from their country, have become refugees in Uganda. And the local organization, the Boer Community Development Association, have members there. So when there are needs, we tend to address them. Some of this money is shared equally depending on the needs of the people or Boer community, wherever they are in Eastern Africa. The refugees in northern Uganda are primarily depending on themselves. They do farming. They do farm. Because if you look at it, one refugee is given 7,000 Ugandan shillings. 7,000 Ugandan shilling is about $2. So how can you subsist on $2 a month? And it doesn't come on time. And so what these local people have done is rent a piece of land, and they farm. They do farming, and we try to help them as well with the little money that we get from our main organization in the West.
Understood. It's just interesting to see like how this Boer community has different links through the West in Uganda and also in South Sudan. Adriana, what do you think makes you specific, or your organization specifically, good at responding to climate response to climate disasters in Peru?
I think one of our strengths is to work through experts NGOs in Peru, Peruvian NGOs that are close to the communities, that are well connected, and that build something that Manuel mentioned, trust. I think it's important not only for climate change, as you mentioned, but for any other kind of development programs. And the other is that we share with our NGOs, with the partners NGO we supported, we share our approach, our methodology, which is culturally sensitive, is based in participatory methods. And at the end, all of this is not only helping in sustainability or helping in create real and important positive change in the communities, but also it creates community resilience. And this is important for any kind of response, no, even climate change, emergency, disaster, or risk, or any other kind of necessities. In addition, of course, we have connection with Diaspora in United States because our funders are there. I think this is a strength not only for funding reasons, but because we can share priorities, necessities. Sometimes we say we educate Diaspora because we share, for example, evidence of necessities, or for example, we put emphasis on climate change risk, so they are more aware of where or how they can support us. And finally, we are a diaspora organization that have local staff, expert local staff, ready and able to support our partners, building capacity to support technically, and of course, monitoring what they are doing.
That's good. And I mean, you said something about educating the diaspora. What did you mean by that? Because I mean, I know you have the diaspora, you have a response in Peru, but then are you saying that you also have a response in the US, since this is where most of the Peruvian diaspora is?
Yes, yes. Just to share with you some data, 3 million of Peruvians live abroad, and 400,000, almost 440,000 live in United States. Not all of them, of course, just few portion of them support our organization. But of course, we are there not only to ask for funds, but to share the reality and necessities because we are there. So when we mean educate diaspora is to share sometimes information that they are not accessible to have it because we are there. Sometimes if there's an emergency, we can share it very quickly, the information, for example, so they are able to respond quickly too. And as I said, and probably I need to mention and share this with you, I mentioned at the beginning that environment was one of our entry points, but we are working now in make climate change a cross-cutting issue. Gender is a cross-cutting issue for us as a Help Peru, but also now we are working in making this because we realize it's an emergency, it's a necessity. And any other initiative we are working, even education or even health, is not going to be sustainable or is threatened if we are not addressing climate change risks.
Thank you. Okay, now we also have to talk about the challenges. So let's do that. Daniel, like what are some of the challenges you have seen in South Sudan when you did that research?
Okay, thank you. South Sudan has a very unique problem, but not entirely unique to South Sudan. It's a sub-Saharan African issue. There's the issue of tribalism. People tend to trust those that speaks like them, those that look like them. And it was aggravated by what I said earlier. When the war erupted in 1983, it did not equally affect everyone. And those areas that were heavily affected represent the vast majority of the people that are in the West. And so when they remit money back to South Sudan, they are doing it on the basis of their tribe, on the basis of their clan, and on the basis of their families. And so those who do not have the relative in the West tend not to benefit. They don't get anything. So tribalism, I would say, is a major problem that is hindering the efforts of the diaspora population in the West. Now, the other one, the diaspora population seem not to understand in entirety the impact of global change in climate and what it represents for South Sudan. They don't fully understand it. And because they don't fully understand it, they focus only on responses. And I think prevention is better than cure, they say, and I agree. And so their role should shift they should prioritize environmental activism by engaging the people of South Sudan, particularly those in the government, those with their power to make better policies. Right now, Southern Sudan is going through deforestation. People are burning down the forests to make charcoal because that's what they depend on. They have no means of supporting themselves. The government have no policy for tree plantings. Even foreigners have come in there from Uganda. They go to the forest with machines and they give order to the chief. The chief don't care. You don't understand the impact of what is happening. And so the local, together with those in diaspora, should work together to create a coalition where they can publicly influence the policies of the government of South Sudan to help mitigate the impact of climate change in South Sudan. Now, the other one is their inability to engage the international NGOs. They clearly neglect them. So their link is through the local organization. The local organization, for instance, in 2020, when the people were shifted from the village and were brought to high ground in Bor, then the local organization was able to go to the UNHCR, to the World Food Program, let them know, here are the victims of flood. We need help. But it was not initiated by those in diaspora. And I think if they found a way to collaborate, to coordinate things together with international NGOs, the power will not be limited to just how much money they are able to spare from their pocket. Yeah, thanks.
So maybe I want to come back to the clanism aspect you mentioned earlier. How does that work? Like, does it mean that when there's a flood or something like this, they leave people behind, or like how does it translate?
So I found a contradictory, things when I went to Duke County. In Duke County, because Duke is the last county. The three counties that I did the study in, they are linguistically, culturally the same people. They just divide themselves among their clan lines. And so Duke County is the last county. The next county over is that of Nuer. It's a different tribe. And so we have traders that leave Boer Town and they go over there to go trade, go to the Nuer land. So when the flood came, they were affected. And so they were not left behind. They were brought back to Boer Town. And once they got to Boer Town, it was different now. Now they're on their own. But the help continued with those who are indigenous from Duke County,
I see. So when it comes to life-saving support, of course, they support them. But then when it comes to not even recovery, but just following up on the emergency relief, that's when, if you don't have diaspora sponsor, it becomes difficult in South Sudan.
And if I may add,
Mm-hmm.
we have an organization called John Dow Foundation. It was founded by there's a group of young men called the Lost Boys of Sudan. I don't know if you ever heard of it. They were a group of young men that were displaced in 1987. They went to live in Ethiopia. And then in Ethiopia in 1991, war erupted, and they were forced to move back to South Sudan. It's like a group of 30,000. Save the Children, UNICEF know about this. They were the heroes, helped them a lot. And then so they have this organization called John Dow Foundation. It's funded, heavily funded by the American people, by the American government. But if you look at where they operate and the people they served, they are the people that belong to the managing director, specifically using it to serve his people. Now the next county over, which is Tweed East County, they tend to benefit because they are neighbors. But when you come further to Bor County, where I'm from, no, they don't benefit, and it's linked to that clanism that I spoke earlier. People tend to identify with their own.
Thank you, Daniel. Adriana, is this anything? Is this challenge any? I mean, do you see this happening in Peru, or is it a completely different context?
Well, at least from Help Peru is not the reality like tribalism, for example, but I'm sure that probably some people from the diaspora support directly their own towns or their own communities. But as Help Peru, we are trying, as I say, to educate which are the priorities, the most vulnerable geographic areas, for example, etc. But I can mention probably two challenges we have. One of them is our connection with local government and government bodies, because although the NGOs we supported are connected with local government, I think we need to be more close to them, learn from each other, build capacities also at that level, because they are the leaders of any kind of initiative, for example, talking about emergencies, or they are the ones that create policies. So we need real strong frameworks regarding what you mentioned, all the necessities regarding climate change, and also funding. I can say that, for example, Peru, for those who doesn't know very well the reality, one of our key economic activity is mining activities, extractive activities. So we generate royalties, mining royalties, for example, and these royalties goes directly to local or regional government that sometimes doesn't have the ability or capacity to spend that money. So they return to the treasury. And sometimes it's very important amount of money, and you can do the difference with that money. So we need to connect, for example, for build capacity on that, but also to collaborate for climate change risk management, for example. And the other is not only for Peru. I think you already mentioned something regarding this. And I was thinking and hearing this since the beginning of this conference on Monday, and this breaking down the way of working in silos, the way of thinking in silos, putting in one side humanitarian initiative or humanitarian organizations on this side, and development initiative, development organization on the other. We definitely, and thanks for your introductory and your passion first words, because I think we need to connect and to work together. And as Help Peru, we need to do it too.
Great. I mean, now it's your turn. I wanted to ask you, like, you heard what how the diaspora is involved in South Sudan, and you heard the example of Adriana in Peru. How do you see, like, from the work you've done so far, how do you see added value from the diaspora when it comes to tackling climate change?
Thank you. So just for a point, my previous life before this job, I have been a humanitarian for 15 years. And so it's an issue that I have a passion. I would start by saying that tribalism is not something that happens on communities, right? The international community is a large aggregation of tribes with allegiances in blocks and, equivalent to clans, right? And if you go from the global politics, which clearly is what is impeding us from moving forward on the climate discussions, and we arrive to an operation, it's the same. The humanitarian system is a tribe that has clans, and those clans believe that no one else is working there, right? The syndrome that we are the only organization here. And communities do the same. If we do not talk before something happens, we will never be in a position of trust to talk when the need demands decisions to be faster, right? And so I think the big thing and the big challenge that we have for the future goes back to my first point in terms of solidarity, is to create in many countries around the world the social infrastructure. Everyone is obsessed with physical infrastructure, but we are not working enough on social infrastructure. And when I say social infrastructure, is the government's capacity mechanisms, resources, and processes to deliver protection to their citizens, the communities taking responsibility for where they want to go and being on the driving seat of deciding what they need, and the international community having the mechanisms to be able to support them. Because I said this on a different event, I also co-chair the CADRI, the Capacity for Disaster Reduction Initiative with UNDP, and we struggle a bit with this. And it's the money, right? No one gives free money. So if we don't work on the social infrastructure to create a path where the money flows, because there is trust, people will not be involved in planning, responses will not be needs driven or vulnerabilities driven. So I think there's a bit of this social infrastructure that needs to be invested, that triggers solidarity, that triggers efficiency. And in humanitarian world, this is very complicated because the humanity that binds us also will makes us close the eyes to things. I was in a Middle East country that had a very serious problem in terms of conflict within the country in terms of a religious issue, and there were many camps of people, and there was a lot of goodwill of the civil society, and one day during Ramadan this organization gave 500 meals, which is a tremendous effort, but the community and the people in charge of the camp could not cope with that because it was not part of their relation. So the food sat 3 hours on the sun. And on that night, 400 people went to a hospital with a food poisoning, right? And this is the risk of that non-communication. Their action was well intended and was good, but not being integrated on what is happening is the negative part. And I could do this parallel in reverse to when humanitarians come to a community and do the same. So in terms of climate change, I think that the social infrastructure is the shifting piece of the challenges of the future. Because as my friend said, the prevention is important. The world cannot wait for something to happen to do humanitarian assistance instead of investing on preparing to avert, right? I usually give this example on money, and I will promise I'll shut up, which is the global finance for climate asks 100 billion a year, 100 billion for mitigation, reduction of emissions, adaptation, prepare for, loss and damage, fix the problem after, right? And between adaptation and loss and damage is the humanitarian assistance, which the acute crisis. The humanitarian overview, all the humanitarian needs, not just climate, all of them, in 2022 was 52 billion. So we have 100 billion to address these that is not delivered. Then we have 52 billion to address all humanitarian needs, which is not delivered. The world does not necessarily has the capacity to channel to 150 billion, right? The humanitarians are shouldering the inefficiency of adaptation and covering for the basics of loss and damage. This has to change. And so the big challenge to me on the future is how we use the money, in which pot, and how we divide those resources, and how we build the social infrastructure to prepare. And Diaspora has an education role. I am 100%. Communities need to be educated. Humanitarian organizations and the UN need to be educated. Donors need to be educated. The day we stop learning, it's the end of any person on any structure. So we all need to learn with each other. And that learning, it's again, both ways, right? I usually tell people that the diaspora has two important roles. It's learning the impact of their interventions and how those interventions fit in the wider picture in the country, but also having the capacity to influence where they are, the actions of the hosting community towards the problems internally and external, because they have that. Sending remittances home to build a house should not be just to build back better, should be to build safer. The house does not need to be better. Of course, that's the ideal. It needs to be safer, because investing money in a house that is not safe does not make it better. And so this is part of that education process. And I promise that's the last thing I will say. Sorry, I get, my brain is weird, so I get a bit sidetracked.
But actually, I want you to talk a little bit more, because you mentioned because because I wanted to know, where do you see diaspora being a specifically good actor? At least you talked about different stages in response to climate change. So, and I would like to know if, in your opinion, you see where diaspora are very good. You talked about education or awareness, I imagine, is maybe one aspect of it. Do you see any other areas where diaspora could be leveraged to tackle the issue?
Well, I think we shouldn't see diaspora as an ATM, right? They are not just a source of remittances. They are a source of experiences, cultural diversification, global solidarity, the resources. We talk a lot. I don't know anyone, including me, which I'm highly skilled migrant, right? I'm international civil servant, but basically I'm a migrant. I left my country in 2004, and I go regularly because I have the capacity to go regularly, but I live away in many countries, 9 so far, I think. The diaspora needs to be brought forward on the day-to-day of the life of countries. And we keep insisting on the remittances part, which is a stream that is tied to the survival of the people that the diaspora loves and contributes. Many migrants worldwide are abroad to give a future to their children, health to their parents, support their extended family. The notion that international migration is an easy thing is very erroneous to many people around the world, especially people with less academic qualifications and less resources. There are countries in the world where the village puts money for that person to buy a ticket to go somewhere, and then what the person earns is invested on things that benefit the village. And I don't think people understand that not all the money. And so this paradigm of the continuum of the relation of diaspora needs to be better invested on, because we know it can be activated on the crisis. How do we make that work? How do we connect diaspora with the academia? How we connect diaspora with entrepreneurship? So when diaspora becomes part of society in both sides, in an origin and at the end, then we'd make migration work for all, because people don't live in a ghetto, because people live integrated in society, so they have more value to where they live and where they come from than only being the people that do the jobs that no one wants, or the people that provide the money that everyone else lives on. There has to be a middle ground. And
That's great. I mean, the reason why I thought we could take some more time on it is because the next section is about the collaboration and the coordination of the different humanitarian actors with the diaspora. And I think we did touch a bit on it in each of your conversations. But yeah, maybe we can go back to it. And if you have anything to add, Daniela, about how does your organization interact with other humanitarian actors? And like, what do you do when you coordinate with them, or even when you just talk to them? And is that level of collaboration sufficient?
You say Daniel.
Oh, sorry, I said Daniel, but I'm looking at you. So Adriana.
Well, we don't have, we have limited coordination with humanitarian organizations, even international or even local actors that work or respond. But let me mention 2 capacities we have in order to establish a more strong relationship with humanitarian actors or organization. And one of them is that we belong to platforms and networks at country level with different NGOs and with private sector, for example, in which we discuss, okay, what are the priorities for Peru, which will be the priorities this year, etc. There, for example, we are so strong in talking about climate change priorities, but also we are ready to be activated if something happens, no? So we are there. There's a human capital and willingness of all these different organizations and private sector that are committed to support communities. And the other is that, as I mentioned, we have a potential because we have connection internationally, being diaspora organization, but also locally. We generate trust. Even myself, I've been very close to the communities. I visit them so often, but also through our local partners. No, so we are there to establish. We are ready, and we have this positive or strength to establish the connection with humanitarian organizations.
What about you? Microphone. What about you, Daniel? Like, what did you see in Bo? Like, is everyone working in silos, or are there interactions with other humanitarian actors, including government?
Thank you. the collaboration is limited to the local organizations because, like I said earlier, the diaspora organizations are not really, trying to collaborate, or they just don't know how to approach them. They're not having any direct relationship. It's through the local organization, like the Board County Development Association in Board Town, engages with the UNHCR and POW, and they give them flood-resistant seeds that they take to the village and distribute. And then when disasters strike, and this the local organization that initiate the collaboration between the NGOs, international NGOs. But there is this issue with the international NGOs. There's a lack of trust, and there is this issue of bureaucracy. I remember when I went to Board Town to conduct my interviews, I was supposed to go to one of the main international NGOs like Lutheran World Federation, UNHCR, World Food Program. I selected LWR because it was closer to where I was, and I was turned away. They wouldn't let me interview any of their staff because of bureaucracy. They told me to go back to Juba, to the main office, secure a written permission from them, then I can come and access. And because of that, I was not able. So I ended up going to a small organization called For Africa, South African base. They were doing a wonderful work. They were hired by World Food Program to build a levee, about 190 kilometers worth of levee to prevent water from coming out into the villages. So the collaboration is limited to just the local organizations.
When you talk about lack of trust, I mean, you faced issues going for an interview as a researcher there, but do you mean that then it's also very difficult for local CSOs and diaspora partners to engage with IHAs in South Sudan?
Yes, it's true for all. Yes, there's the issue of trust. The international NGOs are sitting on lump sum of money, a lot of money, and some of the local NGOs are predatory in nature. They're from the beginning they were able to secure fund, and once they had the fund, instead of implementing the projects that they requested the fund for, some of them will actually steal the money and forge documents, and the international NGOs are aware of that, and so it creates that feeling of lack of trust, and then there's the issue of capacity as well. The locals, organizations are seen as lacking the capacity to implement big projects. And so instead of issuing out money, they just sit on this money, and this money is returned back to the donor later on, and the people suffered. So this is an issue that needs to be fixed.
Oh, yeah. Manuel? So considering just, I mean, considering what we've just heard, how, I mean, you did talk earlier about the social infrastructure, and that I thought was very interesting. How do you see collaborating or coordinating for the sake of it might not be the solution, but where do you see importance for the diaspora to collaborate with other humanitarian actors in those contexts or others?
I think there is a very big role for diaspora and civil society at large in humanitarian interventions. The challenge of that is the processes. In your stand upstairs of DAMAC, next door, there is the IOM booth for diaspora engagement. On the table, there is an entire study on how diaspora can engage better in humanitarian assistance. As in many other things in life, is easier said than done. So I'm going to put the parentheses on this. But to me is, again, being in a place and bringing people in. I'm not saying it's easy, and I know this is a bit on the top level of the conversation, but I think there has to be, from the humanitarian organizations, an act of self-criticism, right? Of course, countries like South Sudan are countries that have had, unfortunately, a continuum of humanitarian assistance. There is no reason for disengagement other than it's easier, right? But the future needs these organizations and others. It's not enough. What is to come to the world, we need everyone working together. So we need to start today to build the trust. And I make a call out for UN agencies, international organizations, diaspora organizations, try to reach out, right? Try to reach out. And I think at least you tried, and document that. Because we talk, and I'm taking my IOM hat to put just as a normal citizen, we talk about the grand bargain, we talk about localization. We don't invest enough on reaching out, right? The COP process is 12 months of discussions for 15 days of agreeing on the text. But the time people sit on the COP, they have agreed on everything. They know what they want. They don't have the text for it. We need to take that approach to these dilemmas. Is we need to talk about our differences on our common values, so that when the crunch starts, we do this. The humanitarian call this preparedness, contingency planning, right? The diasporas do not have this language, but they know what to do. A crisis starts, they grab their phone books and they call all the colleagues and said, we need this, we have this contact of this person there. It's exactly the same. We just call it a different name. So I don't have much more solutions, because otherwise I'll be in trouble with my organization, other than saying we need more dialogue, right? And I've worked in many places where the creation of programs to create this cooperation of culture, called, I don't like the word localization, but I don't like the word. I think the word is too diminishing for the contribution that the partners can have. That is the investment. Any efforts also for the governments. We cannot keep the governments outside of this conversation. The governments have to take certain responsibilities, because if they don't put the requirements of the social infrastructure in their budgets, and this becomes something regular, money will dry out, right? We need to make many of these actions staple actions that governments and others can contribute to, and then humanitarians when needed, and the diaspora in a more frequent way contribute to it, right? That's participation, and that is the last comment.
Great, thank you, Manuel. We have 15 minutes left, and I think I would like to have questions. Please go ahead.
Yeah. They're all kind of comments, but
Oh, just one second. I'll just pass you the microphone so they can hear you online.
I can speak.
It's because of the people online.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
My name is Musimi Saiki and I work for Islamic Relief Worldwide. So we're not a diaspora organization, but we're very heavily funded community funding. So a lot of that comes from the diaspora population in the UK, USA, and Canada. And I just had 2 points. So one's kind of related to what Daniel said, and one's related to what Manuel said, and it's just kind of got me thinking. So it's more kind of 2 points which are food for thought. One is about partnership and collaboration with INGOs. So it's still evolving. And I think as it evolves, as the international humanitarian community, one of the things we need to be careful about is it's all about ethical action. We can't get away from that. So what that means is there's going to be due diligence. So we need to make sure that when it comes to due diligence, there's a balance between what's required and making the process easier and friendly, particularly for the very local organizations in country, which are related to the diaspora in hosting countries. Otherwise, the very edge that diaspora organizations have, which is flexibility and agility, will be lost. They'll all become like mini international organizations. So it's going to be just a repetition of what the system is at the moment. And the second one is, one of the things I felt was suddenly there is this realization about the financial power. And I think that's what Manuel said, financial power of the diaspora because of the remittances that they send back home. We have to be very careful not to see them as cash cows and make it a very extractive relationship where it's all one way. So again, it's about equitable partnerships. It's about meaningful partnerships. It's about mutual benefit, whether we're learning from the diaspora community learns. It's a two-way process. So just do food for thought. But again, if you do want to respond to them and add your own views, I would be more than happy to listen. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, of course.
Hello. First of all, congratulations on this research. I think it's very, very important topic. So when Manuel said, diaspora are not ATM machines, so it got me like thinking. So a few years ago, we did research on climate-induced migration in Pakistan, and we were looking at, talking to communities in Pakistan who were forced to migrate or displaced. And then we looked at the global discourse that talks about, climate migration and what is the reality in Pakistan. And then, we found out it was something that was known, but it was confirmed by the communities that they do not want to move. They want to go back to their homes. And then it got me thinking, like the concept of migration as an adaptation. I think that a lot of it is being focused on not mitigation, not loss and damage, but on adaptation, migration as an adaptation. And I really feel like focus away from everything else and on that kind of shifts the onus of responsibility on the countries that are experiencing these disasters and moves them from the countries who are responsible for these, right? And away from loss and damage is what I'm saying. So again, when you were talking about diaspora are not ATM machines, how do we talk about this very important topic, but how do we also talk about how, the responsibility should not be on the diaspora community. Again, moving the responsibility onto them, because again, the people, the governments responsible for all this impact in these countries are not the diaspora, they are the governments, right? So when we're talking about this very important conversation, how do we also ensure that the responsibility does not fall onto the diaspora? Thank you.
That's very interesting. And I don't know who would like to answer this one.
I promise I'll be short. I'll try. I just need to focus. A point on due diligence so that we don't elaborate more. I think the problem of due diligence is we see due diligence as an action, and due diligence is a joint process, a joint journey, right? The action, the first step of due diligence should be the essentials. You have a registration, you are legal, you're not, you have a bank account, you're a known entity. That's the due diligence action. The rest of the journey to make that organization compatible to another organization is something that needs to be done. It's not a checklist, it's not a form, it's not a policy. It's a conversation about the differences and the common values. And I think we, because of lack of time, transform this learning process in a checklist. And that excludes many people. The same way, and I stand my ground here even as an IOM staff, that when we enter in a crisis and we recruit people, the bulk of the people recruited are the ones that speak English, not necessarily the ones that have the right qualifications. And we should all, at least I commit to that, and I always do, push for that not to be the reality. The people with English have more resources, more capacity. Many of them may be the best, but there are many other people. And the due diligence is a very similar process. It's the investment you make to look things in the right way. In relation to climate migration, I used to work in Pakistan a decade ago for the first 2010 floods. I can attest that Jacobabad was already one of the hottest places in the planet at that time. This is not about climate migration, right? Because the countries that pollute don't even want to talk about migration. That's why in the climate conversations, we don't say migration, we say human mobility. That includes migration, displacement, and planned relocation. It's softer to the ears. Yeah. So say it's easier on the ears. But then we look at migration as a problem. And migration is not a problem. Migration may be a solution. And I think this is the difference. In IOM, we believe that everyone has the right to choose about their mobility. IOM is invested on this as part of climate justice. Giving back restitutive justice to people is allowing them to choose their mobility. They want to stay, they should have the resources and the capacity to stay. They want to move, they should have the resources and the mechanisms to move. And if they are moving, they should have the assistance and the support for that journey to be safe. We advocate for this continuum because just migration is not a solution. We should not condemn communities to move if they want to stay. There are particular cases small island states and sea level rise, it's going to be very difficult to find a solution for people to live. So planned relocation is a smoother. People move a little bit more to the left from where they were, if possible. But there are exceptions. But at large, we should allow people to make choices about their mobility. That's the true essence of human mobility.
Well, thanks for the questions. I just want to focus on one issue you mentioned, and is regarding the role of government, and of course, don't to put everything, all the responsibility or even the economic responsibility in diaspora. And this reminds me the importance of building what I mentioned at the beginning, community resilience, and the necessity to truly involve communities, people, especially most vulnerable people, in all these processes, even humanitarian assistance, preparedness, or any kind of development initiative. I think it's key, and in fact, I think in Peru, in South Sudan, in many other countries, and I can say all around the world, democracy is facing a hard time. There are a lot of civil unrest. For example, in Peru, our last 8 presidents are in prison, for example, and we need to work with youth. That is something that I didn't bring to this meeting, but I heard in previous session the importance, for example, of working with youth to build new leadership, leaders that pay attention to solidarity, climate change, etc. No, so I think it's important also to define clear roles, to start building capacity and involve all the actors. No?
Thank you. Yeah, we have a question over here.
Hi, Wim Steinenberg from PAX. I want to also highlight, sorry, the utility of engaging with knowledge actors from the diaspora in understanding climate change and environmental degradation. And there were 2 examples actually. One from South Sudan, where we did work on like mapping flooding of oil fields from the floods, and we also work with your colleagues from the Sud Institute and the Sud Environmental Agency. And for us, it was very helpful to connect through, to understand what exactly was happening, because we didn't have access to the oil fields, we didn't have access to the because of the limitations of that. And through the networks, it was very helpful for us to understand like what are people's perceptions of the risk versus the pollution from the fields itself. Similar things we also had in Syria as well, where we had diaspora people living here who function as a bridge to connect with information on impacts of the conflict and environmental degradation, and also the worsening impacts of climate change. I think that's also something I want to underscore in this debate. I think for us it's very helpful because we don't have always access. So, and potentially also keen to hear what your experiences are from being this bridge between international organizations, understanding what's happening in terms of degradation and climate change, and how you can connect that in your work. So if you have some reflections on that. Or Danielle, sorry.
Oh yeah.
Thank you for that input. South Sudan has been experiencing a lot of oil pollution, particularly in the oil-producing region of the north, in the Upper Nile, and in Unity State. I think you did work with my colleague Niall Tidmamir. It's a big problem. You have oil companies that are in collusion with the elites in the country, and they just do as they please. You know, at Sud Institute, we do our best. We do our best to try to inform the government on the impact of oil production, what is happening, but no one is listening to us. As of now, there's a new conversation. The government of South Sudan has opened a big block, comprising of 3 states. They have leased it to a company in South Africa, and they have not done any prior studies to see what the impacts are going to be. And this time around, no one is listening. The people have risen up. They don't want that to go on until the government can guarantee the safety of the people and the waterways and all of that. Now, Sud Institute was founded by former members who are living, diaspora population who are living in the US and in Canada. They came back to South Sudan to try to study the policies of the government of South Sudan to see how they could be impacted, with the use of data, and so we're grateful the government of South Sudan has allowed us to operate, because my country, and I need to be careful about what I say, yeah, my country is a bit dictatorial, yeah. So we don't have much freedom, but we try to do as what we can. And thank you for coming out there and doing what you do. You are the eyes. Yesterday, I linked up with somebody. There's a technology company that does the digital mapping, and I'm going to connect them with the Sud Institute. We could use them to capture from the sky, the impact of the. And so when we speak to them, we can show them the visual, what is happening, instead of just explaining. I hope I have touched on what you were saying. Thanks.
Thank you. It's already time, but I would just like to connect on what you just said about using also Diaspora as a transfer, like there's knowledge transfer to be done, and they can act as bridge between local communities and IHAs and so on. Maybe that's actually the perfect bridge to, I would like to show you a QR code where you can see the draft version of the report that we are going to publish in the coming weeks. I don't know if I'm going to manage to do this easily. Bear with me. Yes, it's coming. So we are not done yet with the publishing process, but if you would like to read the report, you can use the QR code over there, the one on the right, and it will be replaced with the final version once it is ready. And thank you very much for coming. I hope this was insightful, informative, and that you are leaving this session with some ideas on how to engage with the diaspora in your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.